My parents spent $300,000 on my brother's wedding, but refused to save my daughter. Years later, they begged, and I gave them an answer they never expected. My name is Emily. I'm 31 years old and I live in Denver, Colorado. I own a small company specializing in designing living spaces, ranging from apartments and townhouses to small cafes that clients want to turn into places that evoke emotions. I'm not wealthy, but I earn enough to support myself, take care of my husband, and provide for my daughter Ava, 8 years old, the light of my life. My family doesn't come from an upper-class background, but my parents, Stephen and Claudia, have always wanted people to think otherwise. I was born and raised in a family where appearances were everything. My father ran a well-known furniture store in town, while my mother always carried expensive handbags and spoke in polished, calculated words. To them, success wasn't about peace of mind. It was about receiving admiration from others. In the eyes of outsiders, they were a model couple, full of love and warmth. But as someone on the inside, I knew their love was never distributed equally. I have a younger brother named Dylan, 2 years my junior. From an early age, I learned one thing very clearly in my family: effort didn't always lead to recognition. When I scored a perfect grade on my 8th grade math exam, my mother simply said, "Good, you did what you were supposed to." But when Dylan got a B+ in history, the whole family threw a small celebration, complete with cake and laughter. I stood in the kitchen corner, watching them cheer as if Dylan had just won a full-ride scholarship to Harvard. I never blamed my brother. Dylan never had to try to be loved, he just had to exist, and attention naturally gravitated toward him. I was the opposite. I studied hard, got a part-time job at 16 to buy my own books, and got into college without so much as a single congratulatory word from my parents. When I told them I had been accepted into an architecture program in Chicago, my mother barely nodded. That must not have been easy, but try your best. And yet, when Dylan got into a local community college, they threw a farewell party, hired a live band, and flooded social media with the caption, "So proud of our beloved son." I learned to stand on my own at a young age. I expected nothing from them, and over time, I stopped feeling hurt. I poured myself into work, building my company from a shared rental office to having my own space. Not big, but mine. I met my husband Matt on a March afternoon while surveying a model apartment for a new project. He was an electrical engineer hired to install a smart lighting system. We talked about colors, light, and how a room could influence a person's emotions. A year later, we were married. Then Ava was born, with a smile just like Matt's and curious eyes just like mine. The first few years after Ava was born, we weren't financially stable, but we were happy. I continued running my design firm while Matt worked at a construction company. We chose a small apartment near a park, where we could hear children laughing through the window in the afternoons. Ava grew up healthy, energetic, always carrying a picture book she loved. There was only one thing I hadn't done yet: get full health insurance for our family. The cost was high, our income was still unstable, and since all 3 of us were healthy, I kept telling myself we could wait a little longer. I had no idea that hesitation would lead to a moment that would change my life forever. A moment that would force me to stand before my parents in utter desperation, only to hear words that I still remember word for word. I once thought I had grown numb to being overlooked in my own family, but as it turns out, sometimes parental indifference isn't just about being forgotten at dinner. It can be a cold, sharp blade cutting deep into the trust you thought had long since faded. I remember the day Dylan got a job at a newly established real estate firm. My mother sent an email to the entire family with the subject line, "Exciting news for our family." They held a celebration at an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, where a single appetizer cost as much as half of Ava's monthly preschool tuition. I attended not because I wanted to congratulate Dylan, but because I didn't want to embarrass my family. I was busy all week, but I still showed up, bringing a small but thoughtful gift, a personalized engraved fountain pen, a fitting gift for someone starting out in business. I handed it to Dylan, and he barely glanced at it before setting it aside, continuing to show off his new smartwatch, a gift from Mom and Dad. To encourage me, I said nothing. No one had ever given me anything when I opened my first design office. My parents had only said, "Hope you can figure things out when you fail." No words of encouragement, no phone calls to check in. I gradually realized that to them, Dylan was an image investment, a charming, well-spoken man who knew how to impress a crowd. And me? I was the quiet woman, the realist, not good at socializing, uninterested in empty conversations. In their eyes, I held no performative value. One time, my mother said it outright after I refused to attend a charity gala she was hosting. "You can't keep avoiding society like this. You're the crack in this family's perfect picture." I remember standing there, staring at the expensive pearl necklace she wore, a piece of jewelry she once told me I wasn't worthy of touching. Every Thanksgiving, our family gathered at my parents' suburban mansion in Boulder. The dinner was meticulously planned, the guest list carefully curated, lawyers, doctors, people with status. I always felt out of place among the sea of laughter and shallow praise showered on Dylan. I would talk about my work, the projects I was excited about, the designs I was proud of, but no one listened. But when Dylan talked about a failed lease negotiation, everyone rushed to console him, as if his failure was a precious thing to be nurtured. One time, my mother stood in front of me and Ava, smiling sweetly as she said, "Ava is adorable, but she's a bit emotionally distant. Probably because she doesn't spend enough time with her grandparents." I clenched my daughter's hand at that moment, my heart tightening painfully. Ava heard everything, and that night she asked me, "Mommy, did I do something wrong? Is that why Grandma—" I forced a smile, held her tightly, and thought to myself, if anyone was wrong, it was me for bringing her into that house full of pretense. I tried to keep my distance, but Matt always encouraged me to give it one more chance, to mend the family bond. He never truly understood how I felt. To him, I was too sensitive, too difficult to connect with, while my parents were just old-fashioned and had high expectations for their children. I didn't blame Matt. He didn't know what it was. Like growing up in my house, he didn't know the feeling of waiting for a compliment after a perfect test score, only to receive a dismissive nod. He had never been endlessly compared to someone else, never seen his mother's disappointed look when he chose design over law or medicine. I always thought I had grown used to it, but I was wrong. Because when Ava collapsed on the floor, her breath weak and her face pale, when I rushed her to the hospital trembling as the doctor told me she needed emergency surgery, my first thought was my parents. I know it sounds ridiculous. I know they had turned their backs on me so many times, but in that moment I thought, they're Ava's grandparents, they can't ignore this. Not this time. I didn't know I was about to face one of the cruelest moments more than anything. Ava started coughing in the middle of last autumn as the cold wind seeped through the cracks of our small apartment. At first, I thought it was just a common cold. She was still playful, still asking for Matt's mac and cheese every night, but then the coughs wouldn't stop. They worsened at night, waking her up, leaving her clutching her chest, gasping for air. We took her to a nearby clinic. The doctor said it was likely mild bronchitis, prescribed medication, and told us to monitor her. But I knew the worried glance the doctor gave Ava wasn't just casual reassurance. 2 weeks later, Ava started getting exhausted. Each step felt heavier. One afternoon, she was drawing when she suddenly sat down on the rug, whispering, "Mommy, my heart is beating too fast." I held her, feeling her cold skin, my own heart pounding with fear. Matt drove us to the city hospital while I sat in the back seat holding Ava close, my hands shaking uncontrollably. They ran blood tests, x-rays, and CT scans. We waited in a cold white room under fluorescent lights that made the air feel heavy with dread. The doctor returned nearly 3 hours later, holding a thick file, his face so serious that I had to grip the armrest to stay steady. "We found an abnormal mass in Ava's left lung," he said carefully, his voice calm but direct. "It's most likely benign, but its location is pressing against her airway. If we don't operate soon, her condition could worsen quickly." A ringing filled my ears. Matt stood frozen beside me, unblinking. I could only manage one question in a voice I barely recognized as my own. "Does she need surgery right away?" The doctor nodded. "We recommend proceeding as soon as possible, within the next 3 days." And he looked at us, hesitating slightly. "The cost for the surgery and post-operative care is approximately $98,000. Abrika. I froze. That number hit me like a slap in the face. I knew we didn't have insurance. We had planned to sign up, but every time I saw the monthly premiums, I kept telling myself, just wait a little longer after the next project is secured. I always thought we had time, But now I realized sometimes a single moment is enough to render all plans meaningless. Matt squeezed my hand. We'll find a way. Please prepare everything for the surgery. The doctor nodded, handed the paperwork to a nurse, and left the room. I looked at Matt. His eyes were trying to stay calm, but I knew he was just as overwhelmed as I was. We had about $115,000 in our savings account. That wasn't enough, not even a fifth of what we needed. I called the bank to request an emergency loan. They denied it because our credit score wasn't high enough. I posted on social media hoping friends would help spread the word, but time was too short and the amount was too high. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by Ava's hospital bed, holding her hand, listening to each weak, uneven breath in the dim glow of the nightlight. Her face looked heartbreakingly pale. I pressed a kiss to her forehead and stood up. One thought consumed me. I couldn't let Ava lie here waiting in vain. I pulled out my phone and dialed the familiar number, my mother's. "Bert, why are you calling at this hour, Emily?" Her voice was light, but cold. I took a deep breath. "Ava is in the hospital. She needs emergency surgery, Mom. I need help. We don't have enough money. Please, just a part of it. I'll pay you back." There was a brief silence on the other end before my mother said, "Well, this is really bad timing. You know, next week is your father's and my 40th wedding anniversary celebration. Everything has been arranged, so many guests have been invited. It would be so inconvenient to postpone now." "Emily," I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "I'm not asking you to cancel your party. Just a little. Ava is your granddaughter. She's in critical condition." Her voice turned stern. "Emily, you already know this. We can't tarnish the family's reputation over a personal problem. I'm very sorry, but I can't help you." I couldn't say another word. I hung up. The pain in my chest swelled, not from being rejected, but because the last sliver of hope I had was crushed. I returned to Ava's bedside, wrapped my arms around her small body, and whispered to myself, if my own family could turn their backs on their own granddaughter, then from this moment on, I had nothing left to lose. The next morning, after nearly a sleepless night by Ava's side, I decided to do something I had sworn I would never do again: return to my parents' mansion. I knew if I called, they would refuse to see me or come up with an excuse. I put on a dark coat, tied my hair back, and stepped into Matt's old car, gripping Ava's medical records tightly. When I arrived, the driveway was packed with cars. Soft music drifted from the backyard, mixed with laughter and the clinking of glasses. The house was lavishly decorated with white flowers, gold ribbons, and sparkling crystal lights. It took me a few seconds to understand. Today was the rehearsal party for Dylan's engagement to his fiancée, Natalie, the daughter of a wealthy real estate tycoon in the area. I stepped into the grand foyer and immediately felt the weight of stares from the elegantly dressed guests. No one offered me a drink or asked where I had come from. Their gazes brushed past me as if I were a misplaced server who had wandered into the wrong section. I spotted my mother across the room, laughing with a group of older guests, a champagne flute in her hand. I walked straight toward her, stopping right in front of her. "Mom," I said, my voice urgent, "please give me 5 minutes, it's important." Burke, she looked me up and down, her expression momentarily displeased as if I had interrupted an important speech. "Emily, I'm entertaining guests, can this wait?" I shook my head, my voice trembling but firm. "No, it's about Ava. She needs emergency surgery, Mom. I'm begging you. Just help with a portion of the cost. We've already sold everything we can." She hesitated for a brief moment, but then her eyes turned cold. "Emily, do you know what today is? This is Dylan's pre-wedding celebration. Everything has been planned for months. Couldn't you have chosen a better time?" I swallowed hard, pulled the medical records from my bag, and opened them in front of her. "Mom, please read this. The doctor said if she doesn't get surgery soon, Ava may not survive. We need $98,000, Mom. She's your granddaughter." The music slowed, and I noticed some people around us had started to listen. A couple standing nearby stepped back. My mother glanced around, then lowered her voice, leaning in. "You're embarrassing me, Emily. This is not the place to discuss this." "I'm very sorry, but I can't help. The money has already been spent on catering, the wedding dress, the band. Where do you expect me to find nearly $100,000 now?" I turned and saw my father. He was standing beside Dylan and a few well-dressed men. As I walked toward them, my father frowned. "Emily, what's going on? Did you come here to cause a scene?" "No, I came to ask for your help," I said directly. "Ava needs surgery. I just need a portion of the cost, please, Dad. She's your granddaughter." Dylan let out a quiet chuckle, his voice light as air but sharp as a blade. "Are you serious? Because you didn't plan ahead, now the whole family has to bear the burden? I'm about to get married, and you expect me to cancel everything? Don't be so selfish." I turned to Dylan, locking eyes with him for the first time in years. I saw the emptiness behind his confident smile. "I'm not asking you. I just hope you still have some conscience left." Dylan shook his head and raised his champagne glass. "I'm focused on my future. Everyone has their own problems, Emily. Ava is your daughter, not my responsibility." I turned back to my parents, my voice trembling. "I'm not asking for anything for myself. I'm asking to save Ava. She is the blood of this family. If family doesn't stand together in hard times, then is it even a family?" My father sighed, then turned away as if I were nothing more than a passing breeze. "Emily, don't embarrass us any further." I stood in the middle of the grand ballroom, surrounded by shimmering lights and people who once called me the good daughter, Dylan's sister, Stephen and Claudia's child. But tonight, they only looked at me with uneasy pity or worse, indifference. I nodded, tucked the medical records back into my bag, and walked out of that lavish mansion, the place I once called home. Every step on the stone pathway felt like a blow to my chest. When I got into the car and sat down, my tears finally fell. Not from pain, but from the stark realization to them, an extravagant party was more important than a child's life. I was no longer the Emily who kept trying to earn scraps of love from people who didn't know how to give it. From that moment on, I vowed to do whatever it took to save my daughter without ever begging them again. I returned to the hospital with a heavy heart and empty hands. Ava was still lying there, her lips dry, her breathing weak, while I felt as if the weight of the world was crushing my chest. Matt held me tightly as I told him everything, every rejection, every condescending glance, and the moment I walked out of that mansion like a stranger. He didn't say much, just nodded, then whispered in my ear, "We'll save our daughter. We don't need anyone else." The next morning we took action. Matt put his beloved pickup truck up for sale, the truck we had driven across states on our honeymoon. I listed my work computer, printer, even our living room sofa on classified ads. Someone came to check out our furniture and asked, "Moving to a new place?" I just smiled, too exhausted to explain. We managed to gather nearly $29,000 in 3 days. It wasn't a small amount, but we were still far from our goal. Berkeley. I started calling every old friend I could think of. Some didn't answer, some hesitated, but there were also those I would never forget. Anna, my college friend, now a music teacher, sent $500 with a message, "I know this isn't much, but it's my entire savings for this month. Ava will make it through." I read her message, and tears streamed down my face. Travis, a young employee who had only been at my company for 4 months, walked into my office at noon. He placed an envelope on my desk. "I have $320. I was going to buy a new laptop this morning, but I think Ava needs it more." I couldn't say a word, I just hugged him tightly. We received small contributions from friends, neighbors, even people I had only met once in my life, people who weren't bound to me by blood, who owed me nothing, yet still reached out to help. Even so, we were still nearly $40,000 short. I started considering taking out high-interest loans despite knowing the risks. I couldn't sleep, my heart constantly racing as if it were about to burst. And then, one evening as I sat in Ava's hospital room, Matt's parents, Carol and Henry, came to visit. They lived in a small home in the southern suburbs of Denver, a house they had cherished for nearly 30 years. They weren't wealthy, just hard-working people. I expected nothing more than a hug and words of comfort, but as they entered the room, Henry pulled me aside into the hallway, placing his hand on my shoulder. "Emily," he said, his voice deep and unwavering, "tomorrow morning, you and Matt need to come to our house. I have something to discuss." I looked at him, confused. "What is it?" He didn't answer, he just patted my shoulder, then glanced toward Ava's hospital bed, where she lay with a scarf wrapped around her head, an IV still in her tiny hand, and said, "Our granddaughter can't wait any longer." The next morning, Matt and I went to their house. It felt emptier than usual. The living room couch was gone, as were several paintings from the walls. Before I could ask, Carol walked out with a cup of hot tea, placed it on the table, then handed me a stack of papers. I picked them up and skimmed through them. A property transfer contract. The final line burned into my eyes. Sale price $136,000. I stared at them, stunned. Mom? Dad, why? Ibriki Carol took my hand, smiling gently. You and Matt need the money to save Ava. This house is just a material thing. We can rent another place, but Ava only has one life. If it were you or Matt in this situation, wouldn't you do the same? I broke down, not with loud sobs, just silent tears falling onto her hands. The same hands that had once knitted sweaters for Ava's first winter. The hands that had baked holiday treats every year. They weren't my parents by blood, but they chose to stand by me when no one else did. Ibrika. 3 days later, we had the full amount. The hospital scheduled the surgery immediately. The operation lasted 6 hours. 6 hours that felt like 6 years. I sat in the waiting room, clutching Ava's beaded necklace, a birthday gift she had made for me with the words, "Best mom ever." When the doctor finally walked out, he nodded and gave a small smile. The surgery was a success. Ava will recover. She's incredibly strong. My legs gave out. I collapsed into a chair, covering my face as I sobbed, not from despair but from the overwhelming relief that hope was alive again. Ava had made it through. 3 days later, in a hospital room filled with sunlight, I watched her sleep peacefully, her breathing steady, her small hand unconsciously grasping mine. I knew that from now on, everything would be different. But deep inside me, something still lingered, the memory of that party, the indifferent stares of the people who shared my blood. And I swore one day they would understand what it meant to lose something truly important. After Ava's surgery and discharge from the hospital, I thought I would collapse from the exhaustion and financial strain of the past months, but I didn't. A fire that had been smoldering inside me for years had now ignited. I was no longer just working to support my family. I worked to repay kindness. I worked to prove to the world, and especially to those who had turned their backs on me, that I didn't need them to succeed. I started each day at 4:30 a.m. I restructured my entire company, from management systems to marketing strategies. I relearned everything I had once overlooked due to being too busy. Financial management, negotiation skills, digital marketing. By day, I took clients to site visits. By night, I sketched designs, drafted quotes, and sent emails to clients across the state. I even enrolled in a real estate negotiation course on weekends. My small interior design firm, once sharing office space with a nail salon, started landing bigger projects. Cafes, studios, a spa chain in the northern suburbs of Denver, then a boutique hotel in Aspen. Word spread. A year later, I signed a contract to design interiors for a luxury apartment complex in the new commercial district. The project was worth over $1 million, 10 times any contract I had ever secured. It was the turning point that transformed my company from an obscure name into an industry leader. Modern Spaces magazine wrote an article about me with the headline, "Emily Monroe, from a simple mom to a woman shaping the spaces of thousands." They asked me what had driven me to this success. I looked straight into the camera, unwavering. I once begged my family to help save my daughter's life. They refused. I don't blame them anymore, but in that moment, I learned that I had to be the only pillar my daughter could rely on, and to do that, I had to become stronger than anyone who had ever tried to break me. Ibrora. The interview went viral on social media. Some admired me, some were moved to tears, and then something I never expected happened. I received an invitation to appear on Voices of Resilience, a well-known talk show that shared stories of ordinary people overcoming adversity. They invited me to New York. During the recording, I told my entire story, from the years of being compared to Dylan to the night I knelt before my parents begging them to help Ava. The host, a seasoned and sharp-witted woman, looked at me with deep respect. "Emily," she said, "if you could say one thing to the people who abandoned you in your darkest moment, what would it be?" I was silent for a few seconds, then smiled. Calm and steady. "Thank you. Because of them, I no longer blindly seek approval from others. And because of them, I found my real family, the people who, despite not sharing my blood, were willing to sell their home to save my child's life." I never mentioned any names during the show, But to those who had witnessed me knocking on that mansioness door that day, who had seen me turned away like a stranger, they knew exactly who I was talking about. After the episode aired, I received hundreds of messages from mothers, fathers, and children who had been abandoned by their own families. They said I had given them hope that they could rise again, even when pushed to the very bottom. A month later, Fortune Home magazine named my company one of the top 30 most influential interior brands in the Western U.S. My photo appeared on the cover, holding a blueprint, standing in the middle of a construction site with a massive sign behind me that read, "Monroe Studio, designed to heal." I didn't cry, I didn't feel proud, I only felt at peace because I knew that all of this, every step forward, every drop of sweat, came from one thing: my love for Ava. She was my driving force, my reason to keep going, and proof that sometimes pain creates the greatest strength. But I also knew that the people who once turned their backs on me, they were watching. And I had never forgotten my mother's eyes when I begged her to help her granddaughter. I hadn't forgotten my father's nod, as if he were declining an unworthy business deal. They thought I would always be the weak Emily they once knew, but they were wrong, and I was certain they were about to realize that. I never intended to hurt them when I shared my story on television. I didn't name anyone, I didn't point fingers. I simply told the truth, the raw truth I had carried in my heart for years. But some truths, when spoken in the light, have more power than any accusation. After Voices of Resilience aired, my story spread faster than I expected. Local news outlets began sharing articles, then smaller TV networks invited me for interviews. People connected the dots from the details I had shared. It didn't take long for them to find out that I was the daughter of Stephen and Claudia Monroe, owners of Monroe's Living, and the sister of Dylan Monroe, the real estate broker who once bragged on LinkedIn about his $330,000 engagement ring. I realized the true media storm had begun when an anonymous account reposted a clip from the talk show with the headline, "Parents spend hundreds of thousands on an engagement party, refuse to save dying granddaughter, and now their daughter is a millionaire." The post gained over 500,000 shares in 2 days. Soon after, Monroe's Living began receiving one-star reviews on online platforms. Customers canceled their orders. Some suppliers announced they were cutting ties. The same people who once shook hands with my father and toasted champagne at his parties quietly removed him from their contact lists because no one wanted to be associated with a family that had turned its back on its own blood to protect their reputation. A week later, I received news that the store had to temporarily close due to financial and legal reasons. I didn't feel happy, I didn't feel satisfied, just an odd emptiness, like an old chapter being reopened, laid bare under the sun with nothing left to hide. And then there was Dylan. He was once the golden child, the pride of the family, the one who stood in elegant gatherings delivering charming speeches. But now, whenever his name appeared online, people only remembered one thing: the man who laughed in his sister's face when she begged for her daughter's life. Natalie, the fiancé once seen as his perfect match, didn't say a word. She simply erased all their wedding photos, removed her engagement status, and a few days later filed to call off the wedding. I heard from an old acquaintance that Natalie had read the articles, then confronted my parents directly. When they didn't deny anything, she immediately left the apartment she shared with Dylan and moved back in with her mother. Dylan couldn't handle the fallout. His business connections dropped him one by one. He called me one night, his voice hoarse. "What did you do?" I said nothing. "You went on TV, you made everyone think I'm heartless." I exhaled slowly. "I didn't make anyone think anything, Dylan. I just told the truth. I didn't twist anything. If the truth makes you feel ashamed, then the problem isn't me." He was silent, then he hung up. I thought that call was the end, but it wasn't. A few weeks later, I received a handwritten letter from my mother. Pale yellow paper, neat but slightly shaky handwriting, as if her hands were no longer steady. "Emily, we have lost everything. Your father is selling the mansion. Dylan is unemployed. Our family name is in ruins. I am not writing to blame you. I am writing because I don't know what else to do. We were wrong, I know that. But please, if you have any mercy left, help us." I read the letter over and over that night. I thought about that mansion, the place where I was turned away in the middle of laughter and expensive wine. I thought about Ava's fragile breaths in that hospital bed. I thought about the aged hands of Matt's parents, the ones who, despite not sharing our blood, had sold their home to save their granddaughter. And I realized, some losses cannot be repaired with money. I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. I didn't feel joy at their downfall, but I also no longer held resentment. It was simply that now I had a new family, the ones who showed love through actions, not empty prestige. And I had learned the most important lesson of my life: not everyone you are born to will walk with you until the end. And a part of me knew this wouldn't be the last time they reached out to me, but next time, I would be the one setting the terms. After everything that happened, I understood something more deeply than ever: no one succeeds alone. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how strong I became, Ava was still alive today, not just because of my willpower, but because of the kindness of those around me. People who didn't share my blood, yet chose to stand by me when the world turned away. I wrote down the names of every person who had helped me in a notebook, not to keep track of debts, but to remind myself never to forget. When my company started making real profits, I didn't think about luxury cars or mansions. I thought about the people who had given their last dollars without expecting anything in return. I invited Anna, the old friend who had sent me $500, to my company's headquarters. She still drove the same old red car with peeling paint, still wore the same knitted coat she had patched up countless times. I handed her a thick envelope, and when she opened it, her eyes widened. "Emily, this is—" "I know you never asked for anything," I said, smiling, "but I want you to use this to finally start the music school you always dreamed of. You saved my daughter. Now it's my turn to help you rebuild your dream." She hugged me, tears streaming down her cheeks. No more words were needed. Her embrace was enough to say everything. I also visited Travis, the young employee who had once given me his meager savings. By now, he had been promoted to lead designer, and I awarded him a full scholarship to a prestigious design institute in Chicago, the place he had once thought was just an impossible dream. His eyes welled up with tears, but they were filled with determination. I knew, just like me, he would turn his gratitude into something extraordinary. As for my in-laws, Henry and Carol, I owed them a lifetime. I remembered vividly the day they moved out of their old home after selling it to save Ava. They didn't cry, they didn't complain. They simply said, "As long as Ava is healthy, anywhere is home." But I never forgot the sight of them holding each other tightly in that tiny rented apartment on the south side of the city, wrapping their old dishes in newspaper. When my company was invited to design interiors for a luxury housing development, I quietly kept track of real estate transactions. After months of negotiations, I bought back their old home, the very house they had once sold to save their granddaughter, from its new owner. I didn't say anything right away. I waited until Carol's birthday. That day, I brought the whole family over and hosted a small celebration. Ava had drawn a giant card with wobbly letters, "I love you, Grandma and Grandpa, because you saved me." After dinner, I handed Carol a small box. She opened it and found an old house key along with a copy of the property deed. Her eyes trembled, her hands shaking. "Emily, what did you do?" she whispered. I simply smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I just wanted you to come back home." Henry stayed silent for a long moment, then gripped my hand tightly, as if trying to say 1,000 words with just that one gesture. A few months later, I made a big decision to build a new home for our entire family. Not a lavish mansion, but a spacious, warm house with enough room for Ava, Matt, Carol, Henry, and the second child we were expecting. I wanted my children to grow up in a home filled with love, where every meal was accompanied by laughter, not judgmental stares or heavy silence. When Ava heard that her grandparents would be living with us, she jumped up excitedly. "So that means I get to have Grandma's pancakes every morning, right, Mom?" I nodded and hugged her tightly, my heart warming at her innocent words. Our new home sat on the outskirts of the city, overlooking rolling hills that turned white with snow in the winter. Every morning I woke up to the sound of Ava and Henry chatting in the kitchen, Carol tending to the small garden in the backyard, and Matt flipping through new blueprints in his office. I needed nothing more. I didn't live for revenge, but I lived to remember and to repay kindness in the fullest way possible. Because I believed that gratitude given at the right place and the right time was the most powerful way to heal wounds and open a new chapter, a chapter of true happiness needing no approval from anyone but my own heart. I had lost one family, but I had found another, and that was the greatest gift life had given me. Life moved forward in a peace I once thought I would never have. Ava was healthy and happy, back in school. Matt managed the company's new branch. Carol and Henry lived with us, bringing a warmth that truly made our house a home. I thought all the old wounds had finally closed, until one late afternoon at the start of winter, when my phone buzzed on my desk, displaying an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a few seconds, then picked up. "Emily, it's your mother." A trembling voice came through the line. I gripped the phone tightly, memories flooding back in an instant. I hadn't heard her voice in nearly 3 years, since the day I walked away from that mansion with a shattered heart. "I'm calling because we're in trouble," she continued, each word heavy. "The bank is about to seize the house. Your father signed a mortgage loan to keep the store running, but we can't pay it back. I didn't want to bother you, but if you could help, just $200,000 to save the house. After that, we'll manage on our own." I let out a quiet laugh, not in amusement, not in anger, just a silent, knowing laugh, as if I had been expecting this call for a long time. "Mom," I said calmly, "do you remember the last time I begged you for help, when my daughter was in the hospital needing emergency surgery?" The other end of the line fell silent, then a long, broken sigh. I remember. I was wrong, Emily. Back then, I didn't think straight. I didn't realize how serious things were." "Not serious?" I heard my own voice turn ice cold. "A child lying on the brink of death, and you call that not serious? I'm sorry," she choked out, her voice breaking into a sob. "I know nothing can make up for it, but we—" "Family?" I repeated. "Family is the one who sells their home to save their grandchild, not the one who raises a glass at a party and turns away when their own blood begs for a life." She was silent, then she whispered, "So you won't help?" I sighed. "I will help, but on one condition: you and Dad must come to my company and receive the money in person." "Yes," she responded quickly, as if clinging to a final lifeline. 2 days later, at the agreed time, they arrived. The conference room on the 3rd floor of my company was bright with winter sunlight. On the table sat a sleek black suitcase. Inside was exactly $200,000 neatly stacked in bundles. When they entered, I no longer saw the commanding presence they once carried. My father looked frail, his hair streaked with gray, deep hollows under his eyes. My mother wore an old coat, no longer the elegant woman who once scoffed at my dress for being too plain. They sat across from me, hesitant, unable to find the words. I opened the suitcase and turned it toward them. "This is the money you need," I said, not raising my voice but making sure every word was clear. "Not because I still have feelings for you, but because I don't want anyone to sleep on the streets, not even the ones who abandoned me." My mother reached out for the suitcase, but I stopped her. "Wait," I said, my eyes cold. "Before you take this money, I want to say one thing." They both looked up at me. "From the moment you walk out of this room, I will no longer consider you my parents. No contact, no visits, no requests. This is the last time I will help." Avery, my mother, burst into tears. "Emily, you can't." I cut her off. "And I have to, because I need to protect the people who are truly my family. Matt, Ava, Carol, and Henry. They sacrificed everything for me, and you. What did you do when your granddaughter was dying?" No one answered, just muffled sobs and downcast eyes. I stood up and signaled to my assistant, "Please escort our guests out." My father clutched the suitcase as if holding on to the last remnants of his pride. They walked past me without a single word of farewell. As the door shut behind them, I looked down at my hands, not trembling, not unsteady, just calm, as if the final chapter had been turned. That night, when I told Matt and Carol what had happened, no one criticized me. Matt simply held my hand tightly. "You did the right thing. You are stronger than anyone." I nodded, but I knew deep down this wasn't a victory. This was just an ending of a bond that had fractured too many times to ever be repaired. I had given, but I had also chosen to keep what was most precious to me, my peace. And sometimes, that's all we need to move forward. After that final meeting at my company, I never heard from my parents again. No calls, no letters, no signs that they wanted to reach out. And strangely, I didn't feel empty or regretful. Maybe because I had truly let go. I once thought that when the time came to say a final goodbye to them, I would feel guilt, but in reality, the only thing I felt was relief. Relief that I no longer had to exhaust myself proving my worth to people who had never truly loved me. Relief that I had made my choice. I chose the people who had reached out to save my child, not the ones who turned away to save face. I didn't hold resentment, but I didn't forgive either. Forgiveness, to me, isn't forgetting, it's refusing to let the past dictate my present. And my present now is a home filled with laughter, a stable career, and a life that isn't lavish but is rich with gratitude. Sometimes I wonder if there will come a day when they call again. Maybe when they're sick, maybe when Dylan faces a crisis, maybe when everything falls apart beyond repair. And when that day comes, what will I do? I don't have a clear answer. I am human. My heart still holds contradictions that logic cannot fully untangle. I once stood before my father, seeing that he had aged 10 years in just one, and part of me still felt pain. But I also remember how he turned his back when I begged to save Ava. I remember how my mother held her wine glass instead of my hand. I remember it all. And perhaps because I remember so vividly, I haven't slammed the door shut completely. But that door now rests in my hands, not as an open wound, but as the greatest lesson of my life. I share this story not to attack anyone, not to dwell on the past, or to seek sympathy. I share it because I know there are many people out there like me. People who have been shattered by their own families, people who believed they had to endure, to sacrifice just because of the words blood ties. But the truth is, not everyone who shares your blood is your family. And sometimes choosing to walk away isn't cruelty, it's learning to save yourself. If you are standing at the crossroads of duty and pain, I want to tell you this. You are not alone, and you have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to love without being used. You have the right to protect yourself and those who deserve it, even if it means walking away from relationships that once felt impossible to leave. Today, every morning, I wake up in a home filled with warmth and joy. Ava is always the first to run into my room, hugging me tight and whispering, "Last night I dreamed you were a superhero, Mom." That simple sentence is enough to assure me that every painful decision I made was the right one. Matt often tells me I'm the strongest person he's ever met. I'm not sure if I'm strong, but I know I am someone who has learned how to stand up, not just for myself, but for the family I rebuilt from nothing but my 2 hands and a heart that never stopped hoping.